Welcome to Writing Matters. My name is Bailey Sanford.
And I am Nevaeh Tigert, and we are excited to continue a series of discussion on the history of writing and writing instruction.
Joining us today is Dr. Amy Hagenrater. Dr. Hagenrater is an assistant chair professor and professor of English, Language, and Media Studies at UMES. She is going to talk to us today about women's writing.
Hello.
Hi. How are you today?
I am excellent, thank you.
So, as you know, March is Women's History Month. So why does writing matter so much to this conversation? And what do you think the relationship between women's history and women's writing is?
Well, writing is history. So who gets to tell the story, whose voices are centered, who's featured, and so we have 1 month for women.
I know.
But it's an important month. And so one of the things that I always talk to my students about is I ask them what they read in school. And usually, you know, you have F. Scott Fitzgerald and The Great Gatsby, and I can probably ask you what stories you read, Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter, and those are important stories. But women's stories are often sort of put back and not really highlighted, and they're part of history too.
Just as much, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we think about voices being silenced, and we might get the idea that women weren't writing, but women have always been writing. There's a really interesting book, 1405 French, Christine de Pizan, called The Book of the City of Ladies. And in that very book, she's sitting there reading all these works written by men. And she's like, I'm depicted as stupid and feeble-minded and crazy. Where do I fit in history? And it's an allegory, and she's visited by reason, rectitude, and justice. And they give her a path forward. She's like, these are not your stories, but build this city through these women's stories. And the whole book is really collecting and narrating these stories of women throughout history. And it's just think 1405 France.
Wow.
It's a really powerful reminder that this has been an ongoing issue still in 2026.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To this day,
Yeah,
literally. That is
absolutely.
true.
Yeah.
To this day.
Has writing always been accessible to women, or has there been a cost to women who choose to use their voice?
Absolutely, there's been a cost, and it's often with a label of crazy or they're silenced.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you read, there's a story called The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and it's based on a very real experience that she had after giving birth, and a very real doctor named S. Weir Mitchell, who, so you can imagine the complex feelings of giving birth, of being a mom and having that experience, and also being a creative, having that space to write. And this very real doctor prescribed what was called a rest cure in 19th century, and what that involved was being isolated, no spicy food, don't pick up a pen, that's dangerous, don't do that. And so she wrote this fictional story about her very real account. And often what would happen is women would be labeled hysterical. And so if you think about that word, hysterical, hysteria, hysterectomy, it's rooted in women's bodies, the womb, right? Which Greeks believed that traveled around the body, which, you know, our medicine has gotten a little bit better since then. But
just a little.
Yeah, but you still use that word, you still hear that word, hysterical, tied to women, which is very much of an embodied language that has a history itself.
I would have never thought.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what do you think happens to a culture when certain voices are suppressed or pushed to the margins? What do we lose?
Well, we lose women's stories. That's the big thing. Audre Lorde says, your silence will not protect you. And I think as women, we're told to be quiet. And there's sort of a long history of that, whether it be legislated or culturally prescribed. And you have writers like Audre Lorde saying, your silence will not protect you, or Bell Hooks talking about talking back. But the very real cost of that is that women's stories get forgotten.
Absolutely.
There's a really powerful, this is one of my favorite stories. So there's an author, Zora Neale Hurston, who she was an anthropologist, and she wrote a book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And incredibly talented, but she died in obscurity. She's a key figure now in the Harlem Renaissance. But what happened was another African-American woman writer, Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple, who wrote In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, which was about going back into history and reclaiming those stories and the work of women that did all these things but were forgotten because women's voices weren't centered. And she, so she brought her to the forefront, really highlighted what she did in her time. And my favorite part of the story is, you know, she was buried in, died in obscurity, and she put a beautiful tombstone on her grave and,
As
you know,
she
acknowledged,
should.
and it just acknowledgement and recognizing. And I just think, giving the women of our past their flowers. I think that that's one of the things that's really important.
Yeah. Is there something distinct about the way women write, not just what they write, but how they form it in the language that they use?
I mean, I think you can't help but have a unique writing when women are writing, because you're writing from your positionality as a woman. And, you know, so you can talk about this in terms of topic, what women are writing about. They're writing about maternity a lot of times. They're writing about the struggles and the oppression that they've faced. You have a group of poets, Anne Sexton, Sylvia Plath, you may be familiar with. They were labeled the confessional poets because they were writing about things like the perils of pregnancy, their sexuality, abortion, things that, you know, were verboten. We don't talk about those things. And then, you know, you have theorists who talk about, there's a French theorist, Helene Cixous, and my French is rusty, so forgive me, but she has this phrase, écriture féminine, which is like feminine writing. There's a unique feminine sentence that a woman writes. And she says, you must write your body. If you don't, you censor your body, you censor writing and speech. And so, you know, you can't separate yourself from this being when you write. And so there's that. And, you know, Virginia Woolf writes about how women who are creatives and who are writing have to have a room of one's own. And she also talks about having money. That is important to be able to have a career in the arts. But that idea of having a space, a room, you know, and something, if you think about how valuable that is for a woman who is occupying maybe the home space, and then she's got children and she's got family to raise. She doesn't have a private space. She doesn't have a place to go. You know, things have certainly changed, but just having that space afforded to create is important.
Exactly.
Absolutely, yeah. So, we talk a lot about universal story structure, but is that structure as universal as we think it is?
I think that it is part of the story. When we think about fiction, you think about like rising action, climax, and denouement. Or you've probably heard of Joseph Campbell's and the hero's journey and the quest, where there's like a grand adventure. You know, your Marvel movies, you know, those kinds of things. But what's really interesting is there's a dystopian woman writer, Ursula Le Guin. She does a little bit of science fiction, a little dystopian writing. And she has this piece called The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. And in it, she argues that the first tool was not a spear, but like a basket, like a bag, something to carry. And she applies this to stories that the traditional narrative is very spear-like, that it's very like going to a destination, achieving some sort of goal. And it's very like, but she's saying that she says for stories, and is much more of a container, a receptacle, a space to collect a multiplicity of perspectives, and there's a little interiority there. So when you think about women writing, and I mentioned Virginia Woolf previously, a lot of her writing is stream of consciousness. So it's not, I must go from point A to point B to point C. It's like, what goes on in here? And it's inside. And, you know, that might not sound as exciting as like a Marvel movie. But if you are a woman, you know how rich this space is.
Exactly.
How rich this space is. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So Are we seeing, or are you seeing these ideas play out in contemporary women's writing today? Is there a book or a writer you really think that embodies the moment?
There are so many amazing things happening right now, not just in literature, but in film. I don't know if you've seen the hoopla about Emerald Fennell's adaptation of Wuthering Heights, in quotes. You know, her version of that, retelling, re-updating it. There's a new film out about the Bride of Frankenstein. Maggie Gyllenhaal is kind of piloting that project, which is really interesting because in that film, the bride doesn't speak. But in the new film that she's creating, she's telling her story, the Bride of Frankenstein's story. But there's a book out, that was out, I think it was last year or the year before, it's called All Fours by Miranda July. And it kind of follows that same kind of idea of what I've been talking about. Instead of going on this journey, which the book begins that she's going on this to this conference, she basically pulls over, stops in a hotel room, and much of the plot of the story takes place in this hotel room. She redecorates the entire room, which is very evocative of like creating that room of one's own.
Absolutely.
And you know, she's going through menopause and she's midlife, and you know, she's kind of questioning like, what's this all about? What's the point? And then she meets different characters along the way, but a lot of what happens is in here and in that room. And it's in a really engaging story. There's a lot about her desire, her sexuality. Again, something that women have not typically been given voice to be able to write about. So, yeah, I think that there's a lot going on, and it's a really exciting time for women's stories.
Absolutely. Well, we wanted to say thank you for coming on to the show with us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We enjoyed a lot. Also, one more question for you. How do you think this is affecting the future, and how they, obviously, the past of women being silenced has affected our current situation?
Well, I think it gives us an opportunity to kind of go back and again look at those silent stories. Even male writers. I'm sure you're familiar with Wicked.
Yes.
And so you have an author like Gregory Maguire, a man, who has made a career of going back and telling stories of characters from the margins. And I'm not going to say that women are from are in the margins. They are certainly not.
Right.
But throughout history, they have been marginalized.
Yeah.
So I think you see this again opening up this space and place for women to tell stories, to be front and center, and it's part of our political conversation as. Not to get too political here, but where women's voices are important, and they do need to be heard,
Absolutely.
not just in March, but all the time in your literature
Every
classes,
day.
all the time, and even in your music, there's an artist, Lily Allen, right now, who I'm completely obsessed with, who in 10 days took her heartbreak, the dissolution of her marriage, and to, if you watch Stranger Things, Hopper, in Stranger Things, she was married to Hopper, and the demise of their marriage in 10 days, she wrote an entire album that is just raw and stunning. And my hope, I think there's talk that it's going to be a Broadway play, and I I love it. I love hearing these stories and these voices, and just women's creativity is boundless.
Yeah.
Well, we want to say our thanks to you, Dr. Hagenrater.
Thank you.
And our thanks to you, our audience, for watching. I'm Bailey Sanford.
And I'm Nevaeh Tigrit, and we hope to see you on the next episode of Writing Matters.